Okay. Hi everyone, this is SmithyQ from SmithyQ.com. I'm here with a game analysis. On the chess.com forums, a user, RalRal quadruple 3, he asked if he's rated at 1500. He asked if you could challenge someone rated over 2000. I'm currently rated around 2100 online, so I accepted the challenge. I'm here to, we played a game. We're going to analyze it, look at it, and try and give him, some suggestions, see what can happen. But more than that, recently on, again, the chess.com forums, there was a thread, a discussion about is it okay to try and exchange all of your pieces when playing against a higher rated opponent in the hopes of hanging on, maybe getting a draw. Is this a good strategy? And I'm not sure if my opponent was thinking that in this game, if that was his ideas, or if the game just happened to go that way. But this is essentially what happened: is the pieces got exchanged and reached a long, drawn-out endgame, and well, he lost. So I guess it didn't work. But let's just take a look. Let's take a look here. I'm gonna hopefully this game can answer that question and show why, in my opinion, trying to do that is a big mistake. Anyway, so let's look at the game. It started off in the Scotch. One of my favorite openings is white. This is where you play an early d4. And just for the record, I think for lower rated people, so if you're under 1800, this is a fantastic opening. You get your bishops out right away. You open up the center, and there's no chance of anything getting blocked. For instance, in the Italian game, right? Sometimes we reach positions sort of like this, in which everything's really symmetrical, and it's hard to... it can be hard to break through. Sometimes the games become very bogged down, it's blocked, it can be hard to win. Your opponent can make obvious mistakes, and it's not easy to immediately take advantage. With the Scotch game, the game opens up very quickly, and if the opponent makes a mistake, it's much easier to punish him, in general. Anyway, so he took, knight f6. Whoops, that was strange, don't know what happened there. I took the knight, then he took with the d-pawn. This is generally considered inaccurate, because I can exchange queens, and we reach this position. Well, again, we can just see it. He can't castle. He's got double pawns. So those are two positional weaknesses. Well, white is perfectly fine. He's got an easy pawn structure. He's got the two bishops. He can castle. White's going to have a very easy game. And in fact, well, let's just back up for a second. Just look at this pawn structure here. All right? We got the e-pawn, right? And we got these double pawns. If we back up, there's some well-known openings. For instance, the exchange Spanish, in which we have, it's the exact same thing. In fact, if we were to do this, it's basically the same position-ish, right? The pawn structure is the same, double pawns versus white e-pawn. The queens are exchanged, right? And in this position, white has a well-known winning strategy. His winning strategy is to exchange every piece, and then use these two pawns in particular to create a passed pawn and win in the endgame. And if he can exchange all the pieces, so all the minor pieces, both rooks, this is generally a pretty easy strategy, if black allows it. But look what black has. Black has the two bishops, whereas white only has the one. And so this is where black's counterplay comes in. It's an open board, it's an open position, and he's going to not exchange pieces. He's going to use his the two bishops to the best of his advantage. That's the general idea. That's the nature of this structure. If we go back, there's another, the Berlin Wall defense, right? So if we look at the main line, let's see if I even remember what it is. Ha, here we go. Good memory, Smithy. Reach a position like this, which again is very similar. The pawn structure is almost identical. The difference is this pawn is moved up one. Again, the double pawns. Black can't castle, so it's similar to the main game. But again, black has two bishops, and he is able to use them to hold on. And if white isn't accurate and the position opens up a great deal, for example, if this pawn were to get exchanged prematurely, then the bishops might actually give black a pull. Most likely it's a draw, though, because this is the variation every grandmaster plays when they feel like drawing, apparently. Right? But again, it's the importance, it's the structure, and again, the same idea is white will eventually want to try and queen a pawn right here. If we look at this position, what happened in the game? Take, take, right? Where you took with the d pawn, allowing this exchange. Is that you have this weakness here. I have the same strategy of where I'm going to eventually want to queen this pawn, e4 all the way up. Get a pass pawn and do it. But I also have two bishops. There's no concession from white to get to this position. And so it's simply, this is a bad variation for black. He has nothing here. Absolutely nothing. The only thing he can hope for is basically a draw. Where's the counterplay? He doesn't have any. He doesn't have two bishops. The only imbalance is that his pawn structure is worse and the queens are off. It's going to be an endgame. Right? And so for the rest of this game, even though it lasts 40 moves, there's never any doubt, there's never any worry in my mind that I'm going to lose this game. Because black has nothing. And so if it lasts 40 moves, if it lasts 400 moves, I'm in no danger. I could play forever, and I'm rated, 500 points higher than my opponent? He's going to make a mistake. He's going to lose. This is why, in my opinion, exchanging queens, say, at all costs is simply a mistake. For the record, the main line is to take with this pawn. And this leads to some really interesting positions, where after e5, really black needs to block with the queen. I mean, there's no real good square for the knight that moves forward. It could be trapped on e4, maybe. If it tries to go to d5, well, it's just gonna get kicked away. The main line, okay, so black pins it, white counterpins, white counters, again, with these pins, and we reach a really, complex position, which, in all honesty, it is better for black, but this is a position where the higher rated player is, again, much more likely going to win, just because of the nature it's so complex. At the same time, black has real chances in this position. Here, where he took with the d-pawn, there's nothing. And again, I don't know what you can do from here on in, because you're going to be passive. What happened here in the game? So again, okay, he's attacking the pawn, so I pin it. Bishop g5. He plays bishop... My God, my keyboard's messing up. I'm sorry. He plays bishop b7. I play knight c3. Look at the sort of the accuracy of my moves here. Is if I were to play knight c3, you could bring in the pin here. And then maybe I have to do something like this. You could always ruin my pawn structure. That's a possibility, right? Now, this might not actually give black anything, because now, again, I have two bishops, you only have one. I still have my potential pass pawn on the e-file. That's going to be my main goal. But this is definitely a weakness. Maybe you can attack it, right? Maybe black can actually use these pawns to make a pass pawn now. By playing bishop g5 first, and you play bishop e7 and knight c3, I suppose you can still play bishop b4, but you've lost the tempo. Anyway, bishop b6, I castle, king e8. And we can see the main problem here is that, again, there's no weaknesses to attack. The e4 pawn might be weak. I can always play f3. But your rooks are kind of stuck. It's hard to get both your rooks into the game. And that's just, it's going to take you a long time. Okay, now here I played a3, because again, I was always worried about bishop b4. The computer says this is perhaps my biggest mistake of the game. We'll come back to that. But again, I want you to look at the ideas that I'm doing here. Is I'm stopping. Bishop b4 is really the only idea that you have that can kind of trouble me, where you can double my pawns, and then maybe try and win this pawn. And so I stop it. I just play a3. Nice, easy. Also, I can now move this knight, and your bishop can't potentially snag a pawn there, right? No problem. You play h6, you push me back, but this just pushes my bishop to where it wants to go. The knight's no longer pinned, okay? I attack the pawn, you defend, I develop a piece, and then here you play knight h7. Now, to be perfectly fair, your position is... it's hard. What do you do here? I think your best strategy here is to try and get your rook into the game. All right. So this rook isn't very happy. We want to get this rook in. How do we do that? And so I'm thinking, if you're to play very slowly, you can do something like this. You can play g7, king over here, and this rook can come in. By playing g7, you also take the sting of an eventual f4, f5 by controlling this square. We'll see this a bit in the future, right? That eventual f4, f5 advance really restrained you. Right? But that's sort of the general idea. And the one thing to really look at is that this position, again, it is open, but the only strategy I can do to win this game is to exchange pieces and get a passed pawn. That's it. Because these pawns are weak, but they're only weak in the sense of the endgame, of trying to get a passed pawn, right? Because due to the nature of it, it's impossible, if white plays correctly, to get a passed pawn with this structure over here. It's not weak in terms of attacking them, right? It's very hard for me to attack these pawns. Like, where does this knight go? You know, I mean, even if it can go there and it lasts forever, you could play b6, kick my knight away, you could play c5, and it's protected, right? This is the only pawn I can attack. That's it. And I have no queen, your king isn't weak, I can't checkmate you. So the only way I can win this game is in the endgame. Or if you were to just, okay, obviously if you were to blunder, you just, you know, you do something like this, right? And I take it, okay, yes. But the only way I can win this game, you know, normally, is through an endgame. And already, you know, it's, what, move 12? That's how I'm thinking. You played knight h7, which... I don't know. Because I was thinking maybe you're trying to get to the g5 square, maybe you want to put the bishop on f6, there's some ideas, but the rest of your, the game didn't show anything. It looked like you just randomly retreated. Here's where you need to make a plan. What is your plan? My suggestion, if I were black, is the moves I'm thinking about is this. Get my king over here so the rook can come in. It's also possible maybe my king could go here to let the rook in. It both takes the same amount of time. That's the idea, right? Again, you're very, very passive, but you have no real way of trying to win this position in the way it is. That's the that's the nature of the position. So after knight h7, I then played rook d2. So I'm just going to double on the only open file. Nice, simple, logical. And then you played rook d8, and I guess you hung a pawn. If we back up, I think the best move for you here is, again, the value of moving this knight here is it opened this bishop up. And so I'm thinking... Come on, can I put it on? Where is it? Okay, rook d2, bishop g5. Because the idea here is, again, you want to exchange the bishop. If I take, you would take with this pawn. And now, look at this. Now your rook has an open file, and the f4 square is, you're controlling it. This makes it harder for me to try and make a passed pawn here. So, you're doing okay. So instead of taking, I would probably play g3. And now you can play rook d8. You can challenge control. Because if I try and win the pawn, your bishop is controlling... sorry, it's pinning this rook, right? And if I try and exchange first, well, again, the bishop is pinned. And I don't know, we get... Whoops. I guess it's white to move. White does something, you know, you can now move your king here, and now the rook comes in. You're getting your rest of your army in, you haven't lost material yet, right? White still has the long-term pressure, the long-term advantage, right? But you're doing okay. And then after the exchange, you can bring your knight to a better square. This is a plan. This is you doing something, right? By just playing rook d8, this is you don't know what to do. Well, of course I win the pawn. You take bishop g5, and then I get the f4 move in. This is really important because, again, my goal is to eventually play e5, f5, e6. And after the exchange, I got a passed pawn. I'm going to use that to win. So after f4, you played bishop d8, which seemed, well, my plan, again, is to exchange pieces. So of course I take it. I take, I move my king in. You move your king in, rook goes to the open file. And now again, you make this somewhat easy for me, is that you immediately play rook d8. As long as there's rooks on the board, Sigbert Terrash, he said, what, over 100 years ago, that all rook endgames are drawn. It's a joke, essentially, but it's the truth. As long as there's rooks on the board, you've got drawing chances. Rook endgames are notoriously drawish. It's so easy to get counterplay, is that you can be down a pawn, sometimes even 2 pawns, but an active rook can make up for it. That's much different with minor pieces. So when you exchange the rook, so this is move 20 now, is, I don't want to say you're lost, but you're going to be suffering for the rest of the game with no real chance of counterplay, and you're down a pawn, so maybe you are lost. Maybe it's just that simple. You wrote in the comment, just as the game was finishing, you said, "I'm happy I didn't get absolutely destroyed." Now, I mean, did I checkmate you in 16 moves with a big attack? No, I didn't. But from this point on, I played f5. And look at your pieces. Right? You move back, bishop d7. Your pieces are terrible. This knight is out of the game. This bishop has no legal moves, basically. All right, it can only move one direction anywhere. It's like a checker piece right now. It's got nothing. And the only thing you can do, again, is try and stop my slow, gradual advance, which is no fun at all. If I'm going to lose, I'd rather lose in 20 moves to a huge attack than lose in 40 moves, suffering the entire time. And that's what happens here. And now I'm going to try and, the rest of this game, I try and provoke weaknesses, which I can then use to attack. I'm not saying I played this endgame particularly well, what follows here, but my position is so much easier to play, where if I make a mistake, you're still suffering, right? I had to make lots of mistakes for you to become even equal, where if you make even just a couple mistakes, you go from very bad to losing almost instantly. So that's what happens. I played bishop c4, and then I provoke this f6 move. Because now look at this. Just look at these squares here. Look at this. If I can get my king all the way here to g6, I'm pressuring g7. I've got an invasion square with my king. If we back up, well, it's like this. It's hard for my king to get to the king side. There's no easy way. And so once you play f6, there it is. Now also your knight can't come to f6. Your knight's stuck over here. Your knight has no good squares here. My knight doesn't have very good squares right now. Right? It's okay, but it can't go anywhere. So it'd be much better if I could put it, say, on d4 or f4. So I play knight e2. You move your knight around. Well, I move my knight to a perfect square. You bring your king out, move my knight in, attacking the weakness. I'm not going to lie here, actually. I kind of miscalculated. I thought I was winning the pawn. I thought I'm just going to, I won a pawn. Easy. And for some reason, I didn't even notice that you could play g6 and your knight controlled the square. So that was, that could have been a very silly mistake on my part. As it happened, it didn't really matter, because after knight g7, and then you played g5, I was able to bring my knight right back in. And notice here, this is even worse now, is this pawn structure. These squares are still very weak, and now there's this h5 square. If I can put my king on, you're just, you're basically helpless, because there's no way to defend this pawn. And you can't chase my king away. And really, really simple. I brought my knight back to h5, and the idea is this pawn is now also weak. I'll color it red, I suppose. You need a piece to always defend that, whether it's your king or it's your knight, say here. Now, if your knight is forced to get stuck on this square to defend a pawn, well, again, that's terrible. That's horrible. And that's it. And now here you make perhaps the absolute losing move, where there was no doubt in my mind anymore, is you played a6. Now, same thing over here. We've got all these weak squares, right? My king can come in. Well, now these dark squares are where I'm going to come in. Before, again, if we back up, sorry, let's delete some of these arrows here. Even if my king were to get to c5, it's not clear what I can do next, as long as your king is here on e7. You could always play b6 to chase it away. Once you play a6, all these squares are so much weaker. And also, this pawn is on the same color as your bishop. Your bishop already can't move anywhere at all. By putting another pawn here, it makes it even harder if you just back up. Again, if you were to play b6, I'm not saying this is the best move, but if you were to play it, now your bishop has potential to come here at some point. Or you could play c5, right, and your bishop can come over on this square. And at least it's a diagonal. It's a spot to move. I've said this before to other people, is that chess is played with pieces. And if you look at what the pieces are doing, you can usually tell who's better, who's winning, or what the position is about, what's happening. If you look at this, my knight is on a great square, you can't kick it away, it's attacking a pawn. My bishop is on a completely open diagonal. Your knight is pretty pathetic, and in fact has no good squares. Your bishop has no good squares. And so when I'm looking at this position, if I want to defend, I'm thinking, again, if I'm black, okay, I need to, don't make pawn moves. Don't make pawn moves. Definitely don't play a6. I want to think about my pieces. How can I get my pieces better? Well, I would think about bishop e8, because this attacks the knight. The knight's going to do something. Maybe it moves, maybe I defend it, whatever. We'll just do something. Then you can play this, with your goal of bringing your knight to e5. Well, now, all of a sudden, your knight went from terrible to good. And it's going to be a lot harder for me to advance, right? Because your pieces are now better. Chess is played with pieces. Maybe you can even hold that. So g4 wouldn't be a good move. Doesn't matter. We back up. Let's look at the game. a6. And so again, I've got these weaknesses, so I'm going to advance with my king right away. King d4. Now you brought your bishop back. Well, I played knight g7. Because now I'm always targeting the bishop. So if your king tries to move, right, to stop me, maybe you play king d6, right? Well, I'm going to take the bishop, obviously. So you have to watch that. And if your bishop moves somewhere, well, if we offer this exchange, again, I'm pressuring this. My king's going to come in very easily, or e5 is coming. Maybe even this would be better. But again, the more pieces get exchanged, the happier I am, the closer we are to an easily winning king and pawn endgame, if I can learn to speak. When you played bishop d7 here, again, so I guess you're preventing me from exchanging, but now your knight doesn't have a d7 square to jump anywhere else. I play king c5, I'm now coming into my weaknesses, you defend, I bring my king in even more, you bring your king over, and, well, it's over. Your last real chance is, again, the e5 square. Maybe you can't get your knight there, but you might be able to get your king there. And so if you were to play king d6 instead, right? Notice how this also stops my king from trying to retreat. It prevents my king from going forward. Maybe knight d7 is coming next, chasing my king, and then my king has to go, like, somewhere it doesn't want to go. This is the most accurate move, and it forces me to find this. Bishop e6. So that way, if you try to do knight d7, I can take it, and you can't take the bishop, so you take the king. Then I can play knight h5. I attack the pawn. If you defend the pawn, I do this. I'm going to win something. right? Again, you're losing regardless this entire time, but this forces me to find a good move. If I don't find bishop e6, maybe you can push me back. Maybe you're not so losing. Taking isn't much better. I could take with a knight. I could take with a pawn. What's best? And I'm going to win the pawn, win this pawn. C-pawn comes up very quickly. That doesn't look very good. Whoops. But even just taking with the pawn, because now your bishop is completely tied down. It can't move at all. I can play g4, lock you down. You're going to run into moves very, very quickly. This looks even better. I'd play this. Yeah. Anyway, we back up after king d7, knight e6, and now here the final strategy comes in, is I just want to exchange all the pieces. And that's exactly what happens. Take, 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 one more move, and once you played king b8, this allowed the final breakthrough, because you're outside the square of the pawn, right? 2, 3, 4, 2, 4. So you're outside, and so a simple pawn breakthrough actually wins the game. e5, I get the queen, and here's where you resigned. Now, it's easy. You said in your comment, at least I didn't get absolutely destroyed. And it's possible to think that you're doing okay up until this point, where a sudden tactic won the game, with the e5 winning. But that's not completely true. Again, you're dead lost here. We look back here, okay, exchanging all the pieces, yet you're dead lost. We go back. Where's the a6 move? I can't even see it. Once you played a6, this is 15 moves ago. You're essentially lost, right? It might take me a little bit. You've got no hope. Back up even more. Once you played f6, you got this. I don't know if you're completely lost here. You are down a pawn. You've got very little hope. You would need to be stockfish to hold this position, basically. Where, again, I have no risk. Again, if we just look through this game, I'm going to go through it very, very quickly. Right? We exchange my pieces. You gotta go forward. I stop you from going forward. How many threats do you have in this game? No threats. Oh, I win a pawn. Oh, you check me. Does that count as a threat? Well, you just provoke f4. Okay, we exchange. Move in. Exchange. I restrict you. I force you to... You're trying to move around. You have no threats at all. You couldn't do anything. And it's entirely because you had no active pieces, you had a worse structure, I was a higher rate opponent, I slowly pushed forward. So exchanging these queens here, and it all stems back to the very beginning, where we took with the d-pawn, we allowed this structure in which white has a completely safe, completely easy position, and this is held for a lower rated player. And I want to be perfectly frank here. I did not play this entire endgame especially well. The computer has lots of recommendations. For example, in this position, it doesn't like bishop g5. It doesn't like it at all. It likes f3 instead. Because what's the main strategy in this position? It's to eventually play f4 and e5. With my bishop over here on g5, it's kind of in the way. Or h6 and g5 could stop it. Or even, if we just... Even here. Or if I do this, okay, it's actually harder now for me to get a passed pawn, because there's two pawns here, and you have two bishops. I think white's still better, but the computer thinks white isn't as better as he could be. And I'm gonna trust the computer on this one. If you look here, a3, which was a useful move to stop you, the computer doesn't like it all. And it thinks if you were to play knight g4 here with a counterattack, hitting the f-pawn, all right, and attacking this bishop. So I would exchange. How do I defend the pawn? Rook d2. Then you can bring your rook over. I can't exchange, otherwise I'm going to lose this pawn. I'm forced to do something like this, bishop d3. And then the computer gives this line where black's perfectly fine. Look at this. You've got a weak pawn to attack. You've got a bishop versus a knight. Your bishop can come into this b3 square. I'm not even sure if white has winning chances in this position. you're doing great, right? My a3 move was terrible. Not a very good move. If we look further, let's see here. Where is it? There's a certain position. One of my weaknesses as a player is I don't use my pawns enough. So, for instance, let's see if I can find it. 1 second. Ah, here it is, right here, in which I played rook d1, which was fine, but I could have played f5 right away, and then h4, you take the file, I play g4. It doesn't matter, because I'm advancing with all my pawns. There's nothing you can do here on the d file. Your rook actually does nothing. And if I can open a line over here, for instance with g5 coming, my rook is better on the h file. If I play g5, your knight has no squares. This would be perhaps a much faster, more accurate way to win. At the same time, the computer has some other suggestions which showed where I could have improved, where I gave you unnecessary defensive resources. But at the same time, even though I did not play very accurately this entire time, I was able to steamroll. There was very little resistance, and I don't think you had very much fun playing this game. Because you had nothing. You couldn't create threats, your pieces had no squares, you were almost waiting for the executioner the entire time. This is why exchanging all your pieces against a higher rated player is, in my opinion, a terrible idea. If I was against Magnus Carlsen, for instance, I wouldn't want to try and win in an endgame. I wouldn't try and do that because that's what he does to people. He takes almost perfectly equal positions, right, with very few pieces, and he turns them into almost robotic victories which seem preordained, right? There's nothing you can do to stop it. That's how good he is. Now, I'm not saying I'm Magnus Carlsen. I'm not even close, obviously. But in this position, given our rating difference, it's essentially the same thing. It's trying to hold a slightly worse endgame against Carlsen, right? It's not going to happen. Same thing here. Going up against a higher rated opponent in a slightly worse endgame, it's hell. If you were to play, something different, if you were to keep the pieces on, you come here, at least you have a chance. You have a chance to do something. You're giving me an opportunity to go wrong. But when all the pieces exchanged, that was essentially the game. In my view, this is it. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I hope you found that useful. Ral3333. If we play again, I strongly suggest don't just exchange pieces. Try and attack. Do something. Come at me. Make my life hard. Don't just and that's true for everyone. If you can make if you're against a higher rated opponent, again, I'm much more worried about losing to you, right? Because that'd be hugely embarrassing. I lost someone 500 points lower. It'd be instantly your best victory. You'd be so happy. I'd be like, there's real risk there. And if you're to play actively, I gotta defend very carefully. Because if I don't, one wrong move, I could lose. Or in one of these end games, right? There's very hard for me to lose, right? Maybe I don't win. Maybe you can hold it. Very hard to lose. Okay, so again, that's that. So I'm SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you got comments, feedback, I'd love to hear it. And, okay, that's it. Bye for now.